This is The Source on Texas Public Radio, 89.1 FM. I'm David Martin Davies. Today we're hosting the first of our 4 vital conversations made possible by the John L. Santikos Charitable Foundation, a fund of the San Antonio Area Foundation. Vital Conversations is a series of community conversations centered on the San Antonio Area Foundation's 4 impact areas: living and resilient communities, youth success, successful aging, and cultural vibrancy. Our topic today is rebuilding for resiliency, exploring how we can rebuild after COVID-19 in a way that positively addresses systemic racial inequalities and economic disparity in our community. And today we're joined by Ana Margarita CHAGUZMAN, the Doctor of Education, Chair of the San Antonio Housing Authority, and former President of Palo Alto College. CHAGUZMAN, welcome to The Source.
Thank you, sir.
Also joining us, Commissioner Tommy Calvert, Bexar County Commissioner for Precinct 4. Commissioner Calvert, good to have you today.
Glad to light it up today.
And also with us, Council Member Ana Sandoval, San Antonio City Council, Representative for District 7. And Ana Sandoval, welcome to The Source. Welcome back.
Thank you. It's good to be with everybody here today.
So let me ask this question, and we'll hear from each of our panelists to get an idea of where we are, taking the temperature of how things are going presently and trying to move forward. So what are you seeing in your work with the community that shows that there are COVID-exposed systematic problems in the community that also trace along racial lines? And CHAGUZMAN, I'd like to hear from you first.
Thank you. Well, what we have always known is that the low-income citizens are the first to be fired and the last to be hired. And this is happening. Many of our residents, and we have over 70,000 residents and 25,000 units, and many of them are not able to work. And those are comprised by elderly, disabled citizens, and many mothers, young mothers with children. And so we see it every day where they're losing their jobs. They're needing help for food. And thank God that San Antonio and the city and the county have been very responsive. And we are working very well together with partnerships and collaborations to help the low income from San Antonio.
Tommy Calvert, Commissioner Calvert, what are you seeing?
Well, the first thing is that we can't even talk about recovering and what we look like until we deal with the racial and ethnic disparities on the healthcare response. I don't understand why the judge, the mayor, the governor, the president, they haven't been implementing the recommendations that Ana Sandoval and her public health committee put together, which gave higher bars for contact tracers. I don't understand why we do not have a 1-day to 3-day test result come back. I met a woman Saturday who waited 3 weeks to get her test results, in part because they were lost in that group of 5,000. This has a racial and it has an economic disparity against the poor. And here's, in fact, what's going on. We have folks who can afford to go to a Texas Med Clinic or a Prestige ER and get their results in literally 20 minutes. But if you're working class, which is the majority of San Antonio, you have to go and wait weeks to get your test results. That is racial and economic disparity that we as government leaders are not putting a daggum dime to. We should be able to buy out the testing in those places like Texas Med Clinic and Prestige. We've got $80 million of stimulus money from the county, $200 million to the city, millions of dollars to the University Health System, and every time I push and ask the county judge or the head of the University Health System, why can't we get one-day testing? Well, we're doing everything that we can. Our testing is coming back just fine. Baloney. Nobody's getting a blue ribbon on this. We need to get serious about addressing this issue because we don't even know the long-term health and maiming that will happen because of coronavirus, and so I'm pretty hot about it. and tired of the inaction, because it just seems to me it's not a priority, because the majority of people who are dying are black and brown.
There's a lot there, and we'll get to it. We'll come back to it. Let me go now to Anna Sandoval to get her response to the question about what are you seeing in the community that you work with that shows that there are COVID-exposed systematic problems in the economy that trace along racial lines.
David, thank you for that question. I think what COVID-19 and basically what most crises do is expose the vulnerabilities in a community. It just happens that this crisis is a health crisis, and it is a very long and a very intense one. Unlike, if we have a hurricane, it's over relatively quickly, and then we're left with the aftermath. This is a hurricane that keeps going and going. It's an emergency that doesn't stop. What we're seeing in terms of the vulnerabilities that are exposed is I think most of your listeners probably know right now that the people who are most vulnerable from the worst impacts of COVID are the ones that have pre-existing health conditions. That runs along racial lines for a number of reasons, everything from people who have less wealth having less access to insurance, having less access to healthy food, having less access to safe and healthy neighborhoods, to really implicit racism perhaps sometimes in the medical system. I was listening to a conversation not too long ago about how when students train at medical schools, all the practice that they do is generally on white pretend patients. Even the dummies, right, that they perform CPR on are white. So how does that influence their long-term care for the population? Other things that we see are that people who are low income are less likely to work from home and most likely to be on the front lines and most likely to be of color. And finally, that when it comes to the public health authorities reaching out to the community, that is mostly done digitally right now, and it's mostly done in English. That also leaves out vulnerable communities who do need help. So those are some examples of how this breaks down along racial and ethnic lines.
We're having a vital conversation this afternoon talking about how we can build back better after COVID-19, looking at many of the problems that we're seeing exposed currently with housing, hunger, financial insecurity. Why is this hitting certain populations harder than others? Is this an opportunity to finally admit that these are problems and have them addressed? But how do we do that? On the local level, like here in San Antonio, on a wider level across the nation, or even globally? How do we get involved? Well, the first step is to at least point them out. The number to call in, if you've got a question or a comment, we really want you to join our vital conversation. It's 833-877-8255, 833-TPR-TALK. You can also email us at thesource@tpr.org and tweet at us at TPRSource. A 1-minute break, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to The Source on Texas Public Radio. We're having a vital conversation. This is one of 4 vital conversations made possible by the John L. Santigos Charitable Foundation, a fund of the San Antonio Area Foundation. And we're looking at how to build back better after COVID-19, looking at livable and resilient communities. We'd like to hear from you. The number is 833-877-8255, 833-TPR-TALK. Back to our panel. Commissioner Tommy Calvert, Precinct 4. So what does building back stronger mean to you? Where would you start?
Well, the biggest thing that the Federal Reserve Bank told us in 2013 was that San Antonio has one of the best economies in the world, but it cannot sustain it as long as it has chronic undereducation of its population. So the very first priority must be to empower and educate our folks with an Ivy League education or a outstanding in-demand skilled trade. We we must also address the fact that Governor Abbott and the state of Texas have never done anything with respect to folks with learning disabilities. Today we live in an environment where 1 in 5 children in the schools has a learning disability, many of them dyslexia and other kinds of learning disabilities. But yet the state of Texas does not empower teachers with the tools to teach to those particular disabilities. In fact, it's gotten so bad that they actually calculate insurance into the public school system to cover up and deny claims of disability for children with learning disabilities. I know many of these children. In fact, they have to go to Austin in order to find a school for them to learn. It's heartbreaking to hear about these kinds of things. And we have 25% of our adult population in Bexar County that reads at a 5th grade level. That's third world, and yet hardly any politicians ever talk about it. You can't move people into the information and knowledge economy if they cannot read. And so we have to focus more on adult literacy. By doing that, it's going to improve the incomes of parents, and that will improve the educational outcomes of their children. And then I think we have to look at housing. The city and the county must get together to do a joint city-county housing bond. It should at least be $100 million. And through the leveraging of federal, state, local, and private sector dollars, we could actually build 7 times that amount, $700 million in housing, because the inequalities began with the fact that black people were property, Native Americans had stolen property, Latinos were removed from their property, and many of them were unable to get property investment because of redlining in areas which they lived. And so we have got to work to have owner-occupied rehab, because the most affordable home you have is the one you live in, and the rent bondage that people are being put into in San Antonio is outrageous, spending 60% of their income, many folks. We've got to get that down, because when we do, that relieves stress and issues like domestic violence. It allows mom and dad to say, yes, we can afford to send you to college. It maintains the property of our neighborhoods. We now live in a city where heading towards less than 50% of people own a home, and that brings down the property values, because renters tend not to take as good of care of those properties because they don't have the same sense of ownership in them. And so all of these things together are the most significant things we can do to build wealth in our community and build education.
Ana Margarita CHAGUZMAN, chair of the San Antonio Housing Authority. The same question to you, and maybe you can take up where Commissioner Calvert left off. What does building back stronger mean to you, and where would you start? And housing seems to be part of that question.
Yes, and I need to let Commissioner Calvert know that SAHA has $600 million worth of new buildings going up, properties, throughout San Antonio. What we are doing is we are deconcentrating poverty. So we will have new properties at $600 million all over San Antonio, North San Antonio, East, West, South, in all of the corners, all because we feel that we have to have properties that allow our residents to be near transportation, to be near good schools, to be near the functions that they need to utilize, as well as jobs. And so we really are taking this responsibility very seriously and are doing it. But let me tell you what we found when schools closed was that we really have to start considering broadband internet as a basic utility. Many of our properties do not have internet capabilities, and our board, we brought it up to the board, and our board has allocated $4 million in the next budget to equip every property that SAHA has with broadband capabilities. And that is because when the schools closed and the children couldn't go to school, and they said, well, give them, they have computers and internet. And so we checked, well, they don't in our housing. And so that is a commitment, but then we worked with VIA. I think the other thing that this COVID-19 has taught us is that the partnerships that we develop with other agencies are absolutely essential to the population of San Antonio. VIA came through and they had hot spots where our kids could get in the buses and do their homework in a safe place. The food bank has come through for us where we have had meals on wheels, senior centers. We have worked very hard because when you lose your job and you can't get processed for food stamps, what you need is immediate food. And so the broadband capabilities really was so important. And now we need foundations. I know that SAISD has provided every child with a small computer. And so we need for all of our children in all of the houses to have computers, because that is, a basic utility now. It is no longer something that we'd like. It's basic, and our low-income families do not have that.
Ana Sandoval, City Council Representative for District 7, what do you think Building Back Stronger means, and where would you start?
Sure. I think I would start looking at things before the pandemic. Our community had a lot of crises already happening before this big crisis, right? So one of them is the lack of internet that Ms. Guzman mentions, Dr. Guzman mentions. The other one is the low level of education that the commissioner mentions. All of these have really just combined to make us a lot more vulnerable during the COVID pandemic. So what I think we need to do is look at each of those individual vulnerabilities and systematically reduce or eliminate them. So let's start by looking at something that the commissioner mentioned, education, which leads to jobs, which leads to you being able to purchase a home and accumulate wealth for yourself and for your family, and it also leads to good health. Education and income does that. It results in better health conditions or outcomes for people. That is definitely a long-term goal, but we can't take our eye off the fact that we have an urgent need right now, and that is people right out of a job who are going to need immediate assistance right now. But we also can't forget that in addition to those high education jobs or highly skilled jobs, San Antonio and any community is always going to have service jobs, right? We're always, unless we close down the Riverwalk, unless we get rid of our theme parks, and unless we shut down the Alamo, we are always going to have tourism in San Antonio and service and hotels and conventions in San Antonio. So I think as a city, we need to really make a commitment to make sure that those service jobs are also jobs that people can fulfill with dignity and still put food on the table for their family. The truth is, we had too many people who needed assistance even before COVID, right? Thousands of families who would still need to go to the food bank every month, even though the heads of those households were working full-time jobs, sometimes more than one. So something is wrong there. Even though we had really low unemployment, that didn't mean that people were okay. So I think we need to re-envision what our metrics for success are. That's where I would begin.
Let's go to a phone line question, and our number is 833-877-8255. And Jane has called in. And Jane, thanks a lot. You're on the air. Go right ahead, Jane.
Yes, thank you so much for allowing me to be part of this very, very important conversation. And so my feedback and my comments is that currently we have a lot of residents in housing that are receiving some type of funding, some type of support, not to be evicted. So that my question becomes, what are the planning that is currently taking place to prevent large masses of homelessness?
Jane, thank you for the question. First, let's go to CHAGUZMAN, the chair of the San Antonio Housing Authority.
Yes. Well, we are not evicting any of our tenants. till the end through this year, and so we are prepared to have less income from our tenants, because we know that they are the first to be fired and the last to be hired, and so we have funds that we have allocated first to help our tenants with the food needs that they have, and that is most important. We have also given them abilities to be late. We are not charging late fees when our tenants are late in their fees. We work with them individually so that if they've lost their job, then we change the application so that their rent will go down to the minimum. And so we are working very hard with our tenants, because we understand that they are the first to be not well, and so we have passed policies that understand that we will go through a time when many tenants will not be able to pay, and that will not put them at risk of eviction. We also understand that others will not go that way, but will evict, and we have prepared some of the empty housing that we have, which is not many, because we have thousands of people on the waiting list for emergency housing, and so we have prepared well to take care of the community.
District 7 Councilmember Ana Sandoval, the city has been dealing with this, creating a fund and trying to help people stay in their houses if they pay their rent, but there's a limit to that. And there are predictions that we could see a lot of homelessness caused by what's happening right now with the economy. How is the city preparing for that?
No, your caller brings up a great point, and I share her concern, especially given that tomorrow we have unemployment benefits running out,
and rent's due.
I think and rent will be due on the 1st. So first, let me tell you what we've done so far and what we're hoping is going to reduce that potential outcome. We put aside first $15 million for assistance, rental assistance. It used to be called a stabilization fund, or a risk stabilization mitigation fund. Sorry, now it's just called basically housing assistance program, which is what it is. We did that early, I believe it was April, and then with the CARES money set aside an additional $25 million, not just for direct housing, mortgage, and even bill assistance, but also for advocacy services and support services. So right now we're working with San Antonio, a legal association, in partnership to represent people when they are being evicted. And the program is called Right to Counsel. It was brought to the city of San Antonio through the efforts of Councilman Trevino, who had seen this done in other places. So that should be able to help tenants work something out with their landlords. Of course, the city is also assisting with the rental payment. Now, I think your caller, what she didn't say explicitly is that, not every landlord is going to want to work something out with their tenant, and that's something that at this point we cannot control. So I think that's going to be a future conversation with the council. We'll be getting an update on how much of that funding has been depleted early next week. So we should be able to make decisions going from there about how to move forward next.
Commissioner Tommy Calvert, Precinct 4. Homelessness being aggravated. A lot more homeless people are going to be coming out of this situation with the economy, and these are transitional homeless that unless they receive some sort of support immediately, they could become permanent homeless. Talking about a lot of people living out of their cars, trying to find a way to just get through until maybe the economy recovers. I mean, what do you see?
Yeah, I see vulture capitalism at work. I see a situation where there are politicians who are working in concert with groups that want to see a transfer of homes go from the working class in the inner city to those who are wealthier as part of their investment portfolios. The rental programs are fine and good, but if we simply look at the City of San Antonio's report about the number of people who, and you all on Texas and your show have done a series on housing, if you go back to your own series and that data, it indicates that thousands of folks needed housing before COVID-19. Now you're exacerbating that, looking at the GDP numbers that you just projected. And so I don't want us to miss the forest for the trees. Rental assistance is not going to cut it over the long term unless the government decides to do what European countries have done and others, which is give everyone a stipend until the disease is under control. But we have a lot of push and pull in our Congress and division within America. But we are not talking about things like purchasing hotels, which aren't going to see much of a increase in tourism for a while. We need to retool county, the jail, for example. We need to build an assistant living facility for the mentally ill. Your largest mentally ill facility is the Bexar County Jail. At any given time, 20 to 35% of the people there are mentally ill. They do not belong there. It takes a lot of the county budget. That jail and the sheriff's department represents about 40 to 50% of the budget. You take out a third of that population and put them in an assisted living. I can't understand for the life of me why the city fathers and mothers for years have allowed mentally ill patients to go back and forth every 7 days into the county jail. That is just silly. We need to have an assisted living facility. I'm proud to say my Judicial Services Director, Mike Lazito, is beginning the conversation of trying to find more apartment assisted living at the state hospital where folks can have a doctor and counselors and a supportive community and hopefully get back to work.
All right, so I'm going to take a little break here. We're going to continue talking about these issues about building back stronger after COVID. We're taking a break. We'll be right back. Stay with us. You're listening to The Source on Texas Public Radio, 89.1 FM. I'm David Martin Davies. Since the outbreak of COVID-19, San Antonio experienced losses in both life and economic stability. Employment, housing, and food security have fallen off a cliff, and simultaneously there's a call for reforms to policing due to documented brutality and systemic racism. How do we rebuild moving forward? What does that look like for a city like San Antonio? How can we rebuild in a way that addresses racial inequalities and economic disparity? We're joined this afternoon by an all-star panel. We've got Ana Margarita Guzman, Doctor of Education, Chair of the San Antonio Housing Authority and former President of Palo Alto College, Commissioner Tommy Calvert, Precinct 4 at the Bexar County Commissioner's Court, Ana Sandoval, San Antonio City Council, Representative for District 7. This is a special source, a vital conversation made possible by the John L. Santigos Charitable Foundation, a fund of the San Antonio Area Foundation. And I'm going to play a voicemail we have.
Hi, this is Cosima. I am fortunate to live in Beacon Hill, where community engagement and neighborly interaction are highly valued and practiced. This practice has led to the development of a strong network of neighbors that are there for each other, whether that means helping with physical tasks, childcare needs, food insecurity, or emotional support during a difficult time. Sometimes it means working to find ways to help people stay in their homes and provide stability. It seems to me that resiliency comes from the strength a neighborhood has to take care of itself and rely on the need for outside intervention less. By promoting big gun solutions instead of bottom-up capacity building, I fear that resiliency will never take hold. What can your panelists suggest for helping build resilience from within? Thank you.
Tommy Calvert, Precinct 4. I mean, having stable neighborhoods allows people to build a matrix of support, but it seems like they're in times of crisis, we do need big guns to come in to help bring things about. What's your response?
Yeah, I actually in some degrees disagree because I used to run a small global human rights organization, and I went into war zones in places like Sudan and Burma, and I found that some of the big United Nations kind of groups did not do the best work that smaller community-based organizations did. And really, when we look at economic impact, micro-gardening of an area is very important to reinvest dollars within the neighborhoods. So I actually agree with that concept that we have a lot of nonprofits that are going to die because the bureaucracy believes that from a scoring matrix, the larger organizations are better suited to take care of the needs. But there really does need to be an effort to make sure that the capacity can grow in some of the areas where there hasn't been good investment, that we actually stand them up much stronger through a variety of stair steps. One of the ways that we're starving these organizations is the length of time to actually get them stimulus dollars. So the mayor and the county judge asked all of us to be a part of various committees. We started that work in April, I believe, and finished our report May 22nd, but yet here we are in August, and the dollars still haven't been awarded to nonprofits. So in that lapse of time and moving so slowly, many nonprofits can't raise money and are going to die, especially the small ones. The large ones will survive, but I'm not sure if that's part of the vulture capitalist part, where only the big boys with the big donors are the ones who are going to be part of the relief, or if we're going to have a truly equitable empowerment of funds and not just talk about it as the city and county often do.
I have an email question. It says the answer is pretty simple about resiliency. Divest from the overinflated $500 million budget for SAPD and reinvest those funds back into the community. Anna Sandoval, representative for District 7 at the City Council. You have something to do with that budget. What do you say?
I think that's a conversation that we're all having. I think ultimately our role as elected officials when we approve that budget is to do right by the taxpayers and do right by the residents of San Antonio. And how do we invest that money in a way that gives the community what it needs and also what is being directly asked of us? I do believe there is probably a more efficient way to spend some of that money, specifically around law enforcement. If you heard Commissioner Calvert's comments earlier about how the jail is really serving as a place for the mentally ill, well, our police force is part of that, right? Part of that whole system that may be taking the mentally ill people to jail. So, and like the commissioner said, they come in week after week, or we have people who frequently come back. So clearly what we're doing right now is not the solution to that. It's like we're repeating the same thing over and over again. So now we're overdue to look at how we can improve that better. There is one program in the police department called the Mental Health Unit, and what that group does is it's got some police officers, but it also partners with Center for Healthcare Services to provide mental health support and follow-up for those people who would have probably been arrested and gone back to jail, but instead they get the mental health treatment they deserve. That is one small example. I believe there may be other opportunities like that. My committee will be reviewing alternatives to that. There are options in, examples that we've seen in other parts of the country that really expand on that model. And the idea is not to reduce law enforcement or to reduce safety, but how do we make the best use of our dollars so that the community can thrive? So it's not something that we can do overnight. I know that there are certainly demands to do that. We can't just suddenly move $400 million and then not have a law enforcement department. We do have to figure out how to do that in a way that's going to be sustainable and successful. So we're definitely open to looking at that.
Let's go to the callers, and Meredith is on the phone. Meredith, welcome to The Source. You're on the air.
Hi, thank you. I'd like to make a comment, and I'm very happy that Tommy Calvert has already addressed part of that issue, and that has to do with I want to see a whole lot more of the kind of workforce training for jobs that will enable people to build their own communities up as well as get paid for it. And I think in particular, if we think about resilience in the face of climate change, we need workforce training doing jobs like the Green New Deal, building affordable, energy efficient building, doing weatherization in existing buildings, and doing green infrastructure to deal with stormwater, installing solar arrays. So I think that there should be a great deal of emphasis upon those community-based projects where people can get good workforce training for good jobs that the community needs no matter what.
Great. Meredith, thank you for that question. Ana Margarita CHAGUZMAN with the San Antonio Housing Authority. What can be done about investing in people with their housing, the current housing, to keep them in their housing? Because we see a lot of homes in San Antonio that need help.
Yes, and well, I think that, and I'm going to go back to resiliency 1 second, because I think resiliency really needs to be looked at as the power to overcome whatever life gives you. And all of us have had challenges in our lives that have tapped us and have shown whether we have the power to be resilient or not. And I think it's really important to teach children in school and to work with children and to work with mothers, as I have, to show their resiliency and to show the power that is within them to do the work that needs to be done, not to be beaten down. Because a lot of times we think that people without education or who are poor are beaten down, and that's not true. There are many people who, whatever their circumstances, have not been able to be successful financially, that are very successful internally and that have very successful families. And so I think that the power to resiliency is the ability of all of us to work together. And I have seen that in San Antonio, and I have not seen that in other cities. And that's the power that we have to bring to the community. And that's the power that we have when people have no money and need housing, that we can work together to help those who need become more stable. And I have seen it in San Antonio. And I know Commissioner Calvert is passionate, but I will tell you that where I have seen community work in San Antonio, I've never seen it anywhere else.
All right, we're taking another break. If you want to ask a question of our panel about how we can build back better after COVID, the number is 833-877-8255. The question I'm going to ask coming back is, what happens if we do nothing? What happens if we just let things roll? This is The Source on Texas Public Radio. We'll be right back. This is The Source on Texas Public Radio. Thanks for tuning us in. We're having a vital conversation made possible by the John L. Santikos Charitable Foundation, a fund of the San Antonio Area Foundation. We're doing 4 of these on the air. We're also having special ones on Fridays as a follow-up. We're going to do one tomorrow at 2 p.m. This is going to be online. We've got more information on that on our website at tpr.org or on our Facebook page to find out how you can check that out. Right now, we're talking about how to build back better with housing and financial resiliency. My question is, if we do nothing, what happens? Will all these things just work themselves out, or will they go back to the way they were before? Or could these problems actually get worse and then even more calcified, harder even to change into the future? Is this a particularly important time to act? Ana Sandoval, San Antonio City Council Representative for District 7. What do you think?
It's always a good time to act. They say a crisis is also an opportunity, and I'm paraphrasing that. No, but it's always a good time to act. I imagine that the same sentiment is shared by your other speakers. You know, when Tommy decided to run or when I decided to run for office, it's because we thought that there was something that could be better, that we could bring something better for our community so that it could reach our potential. So we absolutely have to act. And what we have to ask ourselves is, okay, what is it that we need to do differently? Because what we did before is getting us to some of these problems that we have right now, right, is making it tough for people to find housing, for people to find jobs. So what can we do a little bit differently or a lot differently? I wanted to address something that your earlier caller said, and Meredith, and I think that was a great point about how do we make sure people can maintain their homes or even make them greener? And that is a great opportunity right now. Not too long ago, the city of San Antonio passed the Climate Action Plan, and we also passed something called PACE, which allows you to make energy efficiency improvements to buildings. So what if we have a trained workforce that's able to do that, that's educated in that and trained to help owners stay in their homes, trained to install solar on rooftops? Those are opportunities for us right now too.
Tommy Calvert, what if we do nothing?
Well, in some ways we are doing nothing because if you look at, I agree with my fellow committee member CHAGUZMAN that we are working together, but that's not the issue. The issue that I see is follow-up. The city and the county is not following up on the very recommendations that we laid out in our committees. They didn't follow up on the social services things concretely yet. They haven't followed up on the public health things that ended up being a huge scandal revealed in Express News on Sunday with the contact tracers. They're not following up on narrowing the time for the testing to come back within a day. That, you know, all the World Health Organization and experts say you cannot contain COVID-19 and quarantine properly and contact trace properly if you're not getting test results within 1 to 3 days. So when we make these requests and say what to the staff is it going to take to get these things done, or we make a recommendation, we don't want what appears to be happening is the establishment has created a process so that people could get their frustrations out, but there is not really follow-up and follow-through. And so if we do nothing, we're going to have a very, very hurt, disparate, and I think a community potentially at some level of war with itself, because people will say, I lost this, I lost that, and that civil unrest is going to be very difficult for us to put a cap on.
So financial resiliency seems to be at the core of where we are right now. People who had few resources, who didn't have assets, those are the ones who seem to be vulnerable, and they don't have assets mainly because of a historic disempowerment that's been going on, multi-generational. Ana Margarita CHAGUZMAN, I mean, what can we do to help people build that resiliency through asset building?
Well, I think that the San Antonio has received some money from the federal government, never enough, but we have received some monies that the city of San Antonio has worked hard to make it reach out into the community. For example, SAHA allocated the $350,000 for the late payments and for rental help. And so I think what we need to do is we need to look at the resources that are available. We need to work better with the foundations. We need to bring the 501c3 people coming in, and we need to be able to learn to work together. Because when you work together, you create the power that doesn't exist when you work alone. And I think that this COVID-19 has shown us that there are people who need our help, and that there are people who will accept the help and who will thrive from help. And so the Alamo Community Colleges are out there providing training and having more scholarships. The public schools need to come through. And so I think what this really has shown is that there is a large part of our community that is in need, and that we do have resources that have not been made available to them, and that if we work together, we will be able to change this community to have a community that is better educated so that they are able to qualify for the jobs that Toyota has brought and that other companies have brought to San Antonio.
Here's a couple of tweets that we've gotten through the hour from Amanda. Yes, we need to build human infrastructure and social capital. We also need big guns to address decades of discriminatory policies, practices, and projects that disenfranchise communities of color and low-income communities. Also, Martha on Twitter, it's time to address the racial and ethnic inequalities that have led San Antonio's current health and economic disparities. So in the couple of minutes we have left here, let me just see if you have one big idea that you think can kind of help us get to where we need to be going, something like, debt forgiveness for college loans. That seems to be a big barrier in keeping people held back. Ana Sandoval, District 7, do you have one big idea?
I have lots of big ideas, Dave, but I think I do want to take up the issue of racial equity, and I think the time is absolutely ripe for us to address that in everything that we do, specifically in health. I think I want to acknowledge the Commissioner's comments regarding the Metro Health response, and I think I know the staff is doing everything that we can, but we do need to make sure that the community is safe and that we are stopping the spread with all the tools we have at our disposal, and that includes making sure that we're looking out for people of color who are being disproportionately affected by this pandemic. So I would say a reckoning around racial justice conversations.
And CHAGUZMAN, chair of the San Antonio Housing Authority, what's the one big thing you think we could do that would move this forward?
I think that I would challenge the high schools to have their students take advantage of the Alamo Promise. And Alamo Community Colleges promised to have free tuition for all of our students who met certain guidelines. Push them to go, because the only way and the best way for all of us to own housing and to have a good life is to help our students, our kids, get educated so that they can remain in San Antonio and become future leaders.
And Tommy Calvert, Precinct 4, Bexar County Commissioners, I've got about 30 seconds for you. One big idea.
We need a new Works Public Administration. Back in the day, the B-17 bomber was part of the infrastructure. Now we need increased hospital capacity. We need to go and get education for community schools. We need to have foreclosure mitigation for folks. We need a housing bond. We need to be able to train people in skilled trades to rebuild our communities, and it can be done.
All right, Tommy Calvert, Precinct 4, Bexar County Commissioners. We'd love to have you back sometime to talk more about these ideas. Also, Ana Margarita CHAGUZMAN, Doctor of Education, Chair of the San Antonio Housing Authority, former President of Palo Alto College. Ana Sandoval, the San Antonio City Council Representative for District 7. This has been a vital conversation made possible through a collaboration through Texas Public Radio, the San Antonio Area Foundation. We have a 2 p.m. deeper dive in this conversation online on tomorrow. More information at tpr.org.
This has been The Source on Texas Public Radio. The Source is hosted by David Martin Davies, produced by Kim Johnson and Dallas Williams, with production assistance provided by Ruben Garcia and Kathleen Creedon. Dan Katz is TPR's news director. Support for The Source comes from contributors to the Community Engagement Fund, including the Gladys and Ralph Lazarus Foundation.